Hello everyone, and you're watching Game Nation 4K. Before we move with the video, consider subscribing to this channel and click the bell icon to stay tuned so that whenever we upload a new video, you're notified. In this video, we'll be looking at the history and evolution of Resident Evil from 1996 to 2023. This is Resident Evil 1996 for PlayStation, PC, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo DS. Resident Evil, often cited as one of the most influential and greatest video games, it is a 1996 survival horror video game developed and published by Capcom. Players control Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, members of the Elite Task Force TARS. This is Resident Evil 2 1998 for PC and all these other devices, which was released in 1998, and it features the same basic gameplay mechanics as its predecessor Resident Evil. The graphics of Resident Evil 2 are composed of real-time generated and thus movable, polygonal character and item models. This one is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis 1999. It is the third game in the Resident Evil series. The game uses the same engine as its predecessors and features 3D models over pre-rendered backgrounds with fixed camera angles. Additionally, a creature called Nemesis is encountered multiple times throughout the game as a recurring boss. And as you can see, the graphics are pretty good. This is Resident Evil Survivor 2000, which is a first-person light gun shooter video game developed by TOS and published by Capcom in 2000. As the first release of the Gun Survivor series, this game was a major difference from the main Resident Evil series, substituting the third-person perspective of the previous game to a first-person view. The game borrows its enemies from Resident Evil 2. This one is Resident Evil Code Veronica 2000. Developed and published by Capcom and released in the same year 2000, the game retains its traditional survival horror controls and gameplay of previous installments. However, unlike the pre-rendered backgrounds of previous games, Code Veronica uses real-time 3D environments and dynamic camera movement. This one is Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. The game is the second installment in the Gun Survivor series and the sequel to Resident Evil Survivor released in 2002. The game is adapted from Resident Evil Code Veronica and features enemies and characters from that game and enemies from Resident Evil 2 and 3. This one is Resident Evil Gaiden, which was released in 2001 as an action-adventure game developed by Capcom, for the Game Boy Color receiving generally mixed reviews by critics. Unlike previous entries in the series, Resident Evil Gaiden assumes a top-down perspective for the environment portions that, upon approaching, an enemy changes to a first-person combat mod. This is Resident Evil Remake 2002, which is of the remake of 1996 game Resident Evil released for the GameCube video game console in 2002. The game retains the same graphical presentation with 3D models and superimposed over pre-rendered backgrounds. However, the quality of the graphics was vastly improved. The remake also features new gameplay mechanics, revised puzzles, and additional explorable areas. This one is Resident Evil 0, which was released in 2002. The gameplay is similar to other Resident Evil games, but adds the ability to switch between characters to solve puzzles and use unique abilities. The player may switch between police officer and medic Rebecca Chambers and convince former Force Reconnaissance Officer Billy Cohen.
What just happened? I thought they were dead.
The next one we'd be seeing is the Resident Evil Dead Aim in 2003, which is a third-gun survivor game in the Resident Evil series. Dead Aim uses a third-person view man moving, but switches to a first-person view in combat with a dot in the center of the screen to help the player aim. It is one of the few Resident Evil games that allows the player to move while aiming, and the game also supports the PS2 light gun and USB mouse. With newer graphics and additions to the game, this game is one of the most exciting installations of the Resident Evil. This is Resident Evil Outbreak of 2003, a survival horror video game released for the PlayStation 2 in 2003, and was the first entry in the Resident Evil video game series to feature cooperative gameplay and online multiplayer support. The controls and gameplay are similar to the Resident Evil remake, with quite a few adjustments. The player chooses a scenario, difficulty level, and a character selection screen. And you can see we have a different character of the lady over here, which is the major addition. This one is the Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 from 2004. Outbreak was followed by a standalone expansion entitled Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. File 2 is a continuation of the events that occurred in the original Outbreak, though the exact order of the scenarios is left ambiguous. The same 8 characters from the first title returned with similar abilities. 5 new scenarios are available. The game was praised for the graphics, fun factor, and multiplayer, but criticized for the lack of voice chat. This is Resident Evil 4 from 2005. This was announced as a GameCube exclusive as part of the Capcom 5, but was ported to numerous formats. It became a cross-platform hit, selling more than 11 million copies across several platforms. It garnered universal acclaim for its story, gameplay, graphics, voice acting, and characters, and is often named one of the best video games ever made, winning multiple Game of the Year awards in 2005. This is Resident Evil Deadly Silence from 2006. It is a Nintendo DS port of the 1996 Resident Evil game. Resident Evil Deadly Silence was released in Japan as Biohazard Deadly Silence. Deadly Silence includes a classic mod, the original game with minimal enhancements and touchscreen support. This one is the Umbrella Chronicles Resident Evil, which is an on-rails shooter released for Wii in 2007. Players can use their Wii remote to target and shoot like they would in a light gun shooter. Players follow a preset path, shooting enemies and picking up optimal and optional weapons and health items, occasionally choosing between multiple paths. And as you can see, we can see these weird creatures, which is creepy, but we've got new weapons to shoot them down. This one is Resident Evil 5 from the year 2009, which was the first game in the Resident Evil series designed for two-player cooperative gameplay. Two-player mod is available online or split screen with a second player using the same console. New features include infected enemies with guns and grenades. The game's storyline is linear, and interaction with other characters is mostly limited to cutscenes. And as you can see, the graphics are much more modern. This one is Resident Evil The Darkside Chronicles from 2009. The game was released for the Wii. It serves as a prequel to Resident Evil 4 set 2 years before its events. One can either play independently with an AI-controlled partner or cooperatively with another player. There were some gameplay changes from the Umbrella Chronicles. For example, headshots were made easier for players to perform. The game automatically adjusts its difficulty depending on the player's skill level. This one is the Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D from 2011, released on the Nintendo 3DS, a combination of the Mercenaries mini-games featured in Resident Evil 4 and 5. Players must defeat as many enemies as possible within a set limit of time. The game includes cooperative play from players around the world, as well as new mods and characters from across the series. The game also features a short playable demo of Resident Evil Revelations. This one is Resident Evil Revelations from the year 2012, originally for the Nintendo 3DS. Later on a high-definition HD version was released for other platforms. Revelations emphasizes survival, evasion, and exploration over fast-paced combat by providing the player with limited ammunition, health, and movement speed. The player has the ability to run, climb ladders, swim, and dive underwater for a limited period of time, in addition to the game's single-player campaign. This one is Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. It is a squad-based third-person shooter video game for PC, PS3, and Xbox 360 in 2012, being set around the same time as Resident Evil 2 and 3, and featuring the characters from these two games, though it is a non-canon hypothetical scenario. There are 12 playable characters in the game, with 6 characters for each side. Each character in both campaigns is divided into 6 separate classes. This one is Resident Evil 6 in 2012, a major installment in the Resident Evil series. Resident Evil 6 presents new gameplay mechanics such as rolling in any direction and running while shooting and sliding. The game also features a 4-player cooperative mod. Resident Evil 6 is twice as long as Resident Evil 5. A new feature comes in the form of tablets. Players may consume them in order to receive and recover health. This one is Resident Evil Revelations 2 from 2015. The storyline is composed of 4 episodes. The game also features a raid mod which returns from the first Revelations game with new features, more missions, and new playable characters. About 200 missions and 15 characters are featured, which span the entire game series. The reviews were mixed to positive, and the setting, story, characters, and the co-op gameplay were praised, but the graphics and some technical issues were criticized. This is the Umbrella Corps 2016. This is a spin-off of the Resident Evil series and was released for PC and PS4 in 2016. Umbrella Corps is a competitive multiplayer shooter and that features zombies. Players play as a mercenary from 2 different corporations, and they're tasked to cooperate with their fellow mercenaries to eliminate all the hostile players. Players can choose to play from a first-person perspective or a third-person perspective. This one is the Resident Evil Biohazard from 2017. It is the first main Resident Evil game to use a first-person view. Unlike the previous versions, the game emphasizes horror and exploration over action. The game received generally favorable reviews and was considered a return to form for the series. Critics praised the gameplay, innovation, and the uses of virtual reality, but the boss battles and final chapter drew some criticism. This one is Resident Evil 2 Remake. Resident Evil 2 Remake is the remake of the 1998 game Resident Evil 2 for PlayStation. Unlike the original, which uses tank controls and fixed camera angles, the remake features over-the-shoulder third-person shooter gameplay similar to Resident Evil 4 and more recent games in the series that allows players the option to move while using their weapons similar to Resident Evil 6. better graphics and action. And as you can see, some more heart-throbbing weapons. This one is Resident Evil 3 Remake from 2020. Although Resident Evil 3 features the same premise as the original game, many parts were original were cut, namely the clock tower, the graveyard, the park, and City Hall. The remakes of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 are much more action-heavy, with very few legitimately scary moments, as the pacing and tone is completely different from RE7 and RE8. Resident Evil Resistance from 2020, released for the PC, PS4, Xbox One in 2020. Resident Evil Resistance is a survival horror game that puts a team of 4 survivors players against a mastermind player who can create traps, enemies, and other hazards. Resident Evil Resistance is an asymmetrical multiplayer game popularized by other titles such as Dead by Daylight. This one is Resident Evil Village from 2021. Like its predecessor, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, Resident Evil Village uses a first-person perspective. It is set in a snowy, explorable Eastern Europe village, described as pulled straight from the Victorian era and much larger and more immersive than its predecessor. Compared to Biohazard, the game is more action-focused. Look at this setting, that's amazing. I love this hall. Oh my goodness, that's a lot of bats. And boom. That's the action I'm talking about. It is insane, and look at that. That's some spooky face, and that is unbelievable. Gold Edition includes the base game with 3 additional major new features, including the new story content Shadows of Rose. Third-person mod allows you to play the main story mod from a new perspective. The Mercenaries additional orders introduces new playable characters and stages. Shadows of Rose continues the story of Ethan's daughter Rosemary.
Hardly worth the effort. Let's wrap this up quickly.
This one is Resident Evil Reverse 2022. Similar to Resident Evil 3 from 2020, Resident Evil Village included a 6-player online multiplayer game titled Resident Evil Reverse. Originally meant to launch on the same day as the main game, but it's delayed until October 2022. Reverse is a 6-player PvP deathmatch game where players become different characters from across the Resident Evil series. Lastly, we have Resident Evil 4 Remake for 2023, which is an upcoming remake of the 2005 game Resident Evil 4, which will be released on March 24, 2023, 18 years after its original release. Like the original game, Resident Evil 4 Remake will feature over-the-shoulder third-person shooter gameplay. The new RE4 will and is expected to be scarier than the original game, with a tenser atmosphere, more terrifying character designs, and darker enhanced backgrounds. And with that, we have come to the end of our video. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and save us by the bell by clicking the notification bell icon so that whenever we upload a new video, you are notified by it. And if you've got anything to tell us and share with us, and if there's anything that you think we've missed, you can comment down below in the comment section to suggest it to us, and we will surely take it into account for our next videos. I hope you had a good time watching this video. Smash the thumbs up button. Once again, subscribe